Welcome to the CFO Show. I'm your host, Melissa Howatson, CFO of Vena. Today, we're starting an exciting new series where we're going to be looking at the various relationships the CFO office has with different C-suites across the organization. So the first relationship that we're going to focus on is the one between the Office of Finance and the Office of the CIO. This is becoming a more critical relationship when you think about the importance of helping to drive efficiency with technology, figuring out where to make investments, and how to assess risks and make sure we're mitigating the risks together. That's why it's critical for the Office of the CFO to form a partnership with the Office of the CIO. And yet, for various reasons, there seem to be things that get in the way and prevent that from happening. And so we're going to dig into what some of those reasons are and what we can do to remove some of those obstacles. And so we're super excited today to have Johan Dowdy here with us. Johan is the head of IT and IT security at Asana, and he's going to be sharing some great wisdom and some of his experiences working with the Office of Finance. Johan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
So for my first question, can you tell me a bit more about your current working relationship with your CFO?
Certainly. IT plays a very important role inside of any company, helping to drive the technology that powers work, that keeps people productive, that drives the company forward. And the CFO's role largely deals with the financial aspects of any company. And as such, IT, to achieve these goals, often spends money, which makes us have a very important relationship with each other. And at the heart of it is collaboration and trust. And these are not things that happen instantaneously or even necessarily organically, but they are things that you do have to work at continually. So I enjoy a great relationship with the CFO of our company, but I've worked at lots of other companies where that hasn't always been the case. I think that part of this is that over time, the perception of an IT organization has shifted from something that's just a cost center that is a necessary part of any business's function and organization to an innovator or a business partner who's helping to collaborate with the Office of the CFO and move things forward. So in my career, I approach those kind of relationships as such, that this is a collaborative relationship and there's give and take, and that it's built on trust and communication, regular meetings, getting to know people personally, not doing things in the dark, and being very transparent and open about how we're doing things and why we're doing these things. It's the same as IT would operate with any part of the business, but it's a little bit more pointed and specific because obviously the CFO is helping to make us accomplish what we're setting out to because, well, sometimes that costs money.
You touch on that importance of that collaboration and the movement away from it thought of as a cost center to really more of a value driver within the organization. So how would you go about collaborating with your CFO in terms of how to drive that strategy and focus on the areas that you think need the most investment and why they need that investment? Maybe tell us a little bit more what that collaboration looks like.
Sure, that's a great question. And I think to understand the way I think about it, one, it helps to think a little bit about how IT organizations have evolved over the last 20 or 30 years. 20 or 30 years ago, IT was very specifically a functional service organization that provided computers, network access, internet access. When I remember when that wasn't a thing, and now then it was a thing. And the technology has changed and evolved, and IT's role has changed and evolved too, that it's no longer just enough to be prescriptive about here's a great new computer, here's a great new technology, you should be using this, both users of the company, and that includes the Office of the CFO. But our job is now to be there and help introduce new technologies, to be a discussion partner, to be a collaborator, to not necessarily be prescriptive at any stage of the game. It's not necessarily up to us to say, well, this is the ERP system that I used in my last company. Let's use it here again in this company. You have to actually go through the motions of understanding the needs of the business and helping to partner to implement technology rather than being prescriptive about what technologies come. This is one of the biggest shifts, I think, in technology over the last 20 or 30 years is that 20 years ago, when someone showed up at work, they got a computer that was infinitely better than anything they might have been using in their personal life. People come to the office now with their own preconceived ideas of what's the best software platform, what's the best hardware, what should we be using. And in IT, you have to meet the moment and figure out how to get the best of both worlds. You may have security obligations, you may have standards, but to do that, you really have to, and this is, I'll come back to your question, you have to be there as a listening partner to understand what the actual technology needs of any team, whether it's the CFO or whether it's the general counsel. They're there to be served by the IT organization. So for me, I've always adopted a very listening and providing and suggesting rather than prescribing kind of mentality, which I feel like takes you a long way in that collaborative partnership. If you're there to listen and create solutions with your business partners and not tell them what to do or prescribe for them what to do, you'll actually build that collaborative relationship a lot faster. So for me, there's a lot of technology that I work with, but then there's a lot of people and relationship building and interactions and listening. Those things sound pretty obvious, but they actually require an intentional focus to execute.
I love how you emphasize that importance of listening and figuring out what's right for the environment. When you think about how do you balance your innovation, because there's a never-ending amount of ideas or new technologies that teams may be wanting to implement based on that prior experience, along with balancing maintenance, which is also an inevitable part of just keeping things running. How do you think about that balance, and how does your CFO help to create some perspective on that?
Technology changes every year. Every year there's something new, and people really move towards the newest and shiniest, if you will. At the same time, being financially responsible is not just something that comes out of the office of the CFO. It's actually something that should be built into the mentality of every team that's spending money. So we think very consciously of, I'm spending the company's money. I'm not spending my money. Maybe in my personal life, I could get whatever I want. But in the context of a business, especially in a public traded company, you have to be very mindful of what you're doing and how you're doing it, and appeal to a broad set of use cases and a broad set of users, all with different needs. So there is a bit of a juggling act. And, on the one hand, the office of the CIO could be perceived as a limiting factor, and this is not the approach we take, but it's one that I've seen and actually in previous lives taken. Sorry, we can't spend that because it's not in budget, or there's a prohibitive mandate to not spend it. Which is not to say that, we are overly frugal. We have to look at requirements and make those kind of decisions for everyone. So we partner a lot, obviously with the Office of the CIO, we partner on our budget. How are we creating things? What are we planning on spending? What might be unplanned spend? Do we need some cushion in some cases because of uncertainty? If nothing else, the last few years have taught us a lot of important lessons about uncertainty and unpredictability. But at the same time, it's never caused us to stop spending money wisely. That's, surprise. And if you can prove that you do that, and with numbers, it's a lot easier to prove that you're holding to budget than say it might be to prove that you're meeting some other kind of like more subjective objective. It's very easy to show when you're staying in budget. And those are obviously things that folks in IT partner with a lot of the office of the CFO, but have to run the business. So there's a balancing act, and I don't like using someone else as an excuse for not doing something. This should be like own the decision, own the responsibility. So the budget is ours, so we own it, but we create it in partnership with the CFO's office. But it's not adversarial. It's collaborative because we're all here for the success of the business. So those should be our inherent goals as well.
You're taking me back, actually. I just had memories of a time when our IT group wanted to give extra monitors to everybody, and we in finance thought, there's no way, can't do it. This just sounds like a whole lot of money, and we really pushed hard against it. And they actually took the time to help us demonstrate what the payback on that would be. And I sit here now thinking about if I had to work without a second monitor, the lack of efficiency that I would have in my day and how I've been so converted. But, an example where initially really had to be sold on the idea and what it was going to do to the business. So in thinking of that, where you've experienced strains in your relationship with your CFO, can you maybe talk a bit about that? And what do you think were some of the things that were getting in the way of constructive partnership there so that CFOs can try to avoid those situations?
I think that sometimes velocity can be a constraining factor. You're urgently trying to do something. Maybe you're trying to close a software deal and you're just really coming down to the wire and you want to go fast. And maybe you've forgotten a couple of important things behind the scenes that aren't necessarily going to pass through the procurement organization and get it done on time. And I think that's caused myself, at least, and a number of other folks in IT organizations with similar circumstance, to take the time to really understand the full process. Like, I've got a deal, I'm ready, let's cut the PO. What's taking so long is, something that someone in IT might be thinking. Behind the scenes, financial responsibility, how's this going to be amortized over the next 3 years? Why are we doing this? Is this the worthy investment? You have to start thinking with the mindset of everyone you partner with to kind of predict and understand what their concerns might be. And also, again, don't do things at the last minute. Nobody likes the 11th hour surprise, I guess, except in outbound sales. That's probably a great last minute surprise to have. But, keeping people up to date, partnering very deeply with your peers on the FP&A team who actually keep you honest and keep you on budget. These are some of my closest friends and collaborators at work. It's like, there isn't any such thing as, it's going to go great until maybe you have to work it through one or two people on the finance organization. We partner with them from the get-go and all along the way and always try to keep them in mind. And that helps avoid that friction. Not so much in my current role, but in previous roles, that's been one of the biggest sources of friction is the 11th hour surprise. Like, we absolutely have to buy this and it needs to be bought by tomorrow. And I know it's 3 days before the close of quarter and you're worried about when this is going to hit, but we need it now. And, some of that could be on us, bad planning. Why didn't we do this a little bit earlier? So it's caused the way I think about how we structure our logistics team, the way we structure our vendor relationships, to make sure there's plenty of buffer time in there, because nobody likes being surprised. We in IT don't always like being surprised. You have to do something tomorrow. We should extend that same courtesy to everyone that we're working with. And, it sounds a little bit overly simplified, but to have a harmonious relationship with everyone you work with, you should really keep them informed all along the way. And, especially if something is going to go all the way up to, the CFO level for signature or for endorsement, they should not be surprised by this on a Friday afternoon. This should be something that, is a known quantity all along.
I love that proactive approach because you're right. If we know something's coming, it's just so much easier when it comes time to make the decision to get behind it. And the reverse is true. When something comes at the 11th hour and you're given a deadline and feel like your back's against a wall, it instantly creates a sense that, okay, we're about to do maybe the wrong thing, and you do then start pushing back harder. So I think that's really good sound advice. So moving over into the category of risk now, how have you partnered best with your CFO in terms of assessing some of the risks, especially when it comes to technology and some of the risks that it can present there?
I've had the great pleasure of working for a number of different companies that have been going through the process of becoming a public company. And so this is an area that I've had the pleasure of thinking about quite a lot over the years. The Office of the CFO plays a very important role in fiduciary responsibility for the whole company. And, whether that's through SOX or other compliance mechanisms, IT is one of their key stakeholders in keeping things running smoothly and avoiding surprises and, keeping the balance sheet accurate and correct. And so for us, there's always a deep partnership, whether that's with our SOX compliance partners, whether that's with the process and controls that we put in place. Everything that we do keeps this sort of responsibility, because it's not just the company's responsibility. It's not just the Office of the CFO's responsibility, although arguably the Office of the CFO bears a little bit more of a potential risk in terms of accountability for some of these things. But again, going back to our job as collaborators, partners, stakeholders, we know this is our area of responsibility. We know that this is something that's expected of us, and we plan ahead for it. And that goes all the way from how do we manage and control access to sensitive financial systems, to how do we keep our inventory accurate, up to date, fully accountable. So all of those things that are just part of running the business, they very, very clearly intersect with the CFO's office, and again, make it a sort of constant communication partnership. We do lots of certification, we do lots of testing, we do lots of reviews, we do lots of audits. This is all a major function of most CFO offices, and it's a role that we love to play, quite frankly. On the one hand, not everybody loves the idea of an accurate inventory, but after you've been through enough scenarios where an inaccurate inventory might have led to challenges, things you learn earlier on in your career, they're something that you just build from the ground up. When you start, we're going to do solid asset control from this point forward. And those, hopefully we end up making their lives easier by knowing these things in advance, by hiring the kind of people on our team who've had this experience before, who aren't learning it for the first time, so that we can meet each other as professionals and keep the relationship harmonious. But obviously all of those things are a very critical and important part of the relationship, and one that does work well if you apply yourself correctly to it.
Yeah, and you touch on that experience, which can be so key when it comes to helping to understand the why behind some of, why do we care about the risk? Why do we care about the controls? And it really can help make it such a better relationship and better for business when those two can come together. What are your thoughts about how the Office of Finance should be working with your team in terms of figuring out some of the innovation within the company?
This is where IT, as a partner to all of the different parts of the company, needs to understand their capabilities, needs to understand the needs, and needs to understand what they can do to improve the technology stack of the company. And obviously, to make these kind of investments, it does require that you have a budget, that you have money to do things. And so when we present an idea, here's something that we're going to work on, I can just use ROI as a very obvious example. You want to understand, what is this investment going to buy us? What does this investment give us in terms of, long-term payback? Because it should always be appropriate to want to make an investment, but you need to have an expected outcome. You need to have something that's going to come of it, whether that's an improved process for your marketing team, whether that's a better experience for the sales users, whether that's a better overall experience for the end users to make their lives more efficient and make their workflow easier. Everything that IT does that's net new, that's new programmatic spend, you need to actually build out a process and build out a budget and build out a rationale for why do we need to do that. IT people often suffer a lot from the idea, hey, there's this great new thing, we've just got to do it. If anyone on my team came to me with that, I'd say, okay, well, that's nice, but show me what it is actually going to do if there's not a really solid outcome from here, that there's not some kind of return on investment. So I think all of those things are, when you're earlier in your career, you might not realize this. You just get excited. This is cool. And, I'm just going to pick on AI because that's all anyone can talk about right now. But there's an exciting new AI feature. We've got to buy it because it's going to be a great new AI feature. What does it do? How much does it cost? What is doing this going to save us? Or what is this investment going to pay us back in the next 5 to 10 years. And, maybe with AI, too early to tell. Maybe with like we're going to completely revamp our whole process around two-factor authentication, and the user experience is going to be easier, and we'll reduce the amount of reset passwords. And, you can build out a very solid narrative about what all these things will accomplish. But if you don't do that and you just want some money, you're probably not going to get the successful outcome that you're looking for, unless you're when you're some crazy early stage startup where they're just throwing money like at everything. But I don't tend to like to operate in that fashion, because it's nice to know what you're getting and how it's going to help you in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think articulating that business case and also understanding how it even fits in the overall bigger picture with the rest of your technology roadmap and where you're going it's really critical to at least stop and have that conversation. Right. For sure.
Indeed. Yes.
Now, when you think about the future of this partnership between the Office of the CFO and the Office of the CIO, what do you think are some of the things that are coming or we should be thinking about as we continue to advance these relationships as a company grows and technology just continues to change more and more rapidly?
I do think it's incumbent on all IT organizations to be forward-thinking and to understand that their role is a service organization, but it's also a vision organization, that it's their job, whether they know this or not, and I say this, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it's the role of IT to understand all the different parts of the business. And again, I've worked for a lot of software companies, and the way that a software company's business is constructed is probably a little bit different than the way like a hospital or healthcare or insurance or banking. Each one of those different industry verticals is going to have a way that IT interacts with, approaches, and understands the business. And as an IT leader, you do have to really spend a lot of time being a diplomat, working with people on all different teams to understand what they need and to even be able to talk to them before they know they need something about what kinds of changes do you see coming. I heard, I might say I've heard about some interesting new tool or platform that does X, Y, or Z. Tell me about your interests in doing that. This is also especially true when an organization looks at leadership changes. When leadership changes happen, often it's time for, with the new leadership comes a new technology. So as an IT leader, you have to be dynamic, flexible diplomat who can kind of move between engineering folks and marketing folks and finance and legal and all these different parts of the company, and be a representative both of the way IT works now, but also help set vision for like what's next. What are we going to help you work on? And that's kind of the really big new important piece of IT in the last 10 years. We're known just like a downstream service provider. We hopefully can present ourselves as thought leaders who can collaborate and can work with you on things and listen, and not necessarily be prescriptive, but also not be passive and just, it's okay to push back a little bit. It's okay to say, let's have some give and take. I had this idea, you have that idea. Where do we kind of meet in the middle? Or, by the way, this other team over here is getting ready to do this interesting thing that completely intersects with what other thing you're doing. I'm thinking kind of vaguely here because these could take on like a million different shapes or examples, but every smaller team inside of an organization tends to think about themselves and how do they move their part of the business forward. IT's in a very interesting nexus spot where it interacts with all of those teams equally and sees what they're all working on and can help connect the dots. Sort of like, you're getting ready to deploy this kind of tool. Guess what? So is this other team. Maybe we can do a force multiplier. And in the long term, this tying back to the Office of the CFO is cost consciousness, tool consolidation. Why would we deploy two completely different platforms that do almost exactly the same thing if there was a way to combine those into one platform that would reduce the overall spend? So I think that's the interesting new place that IT finds itself. And again, when I think about tool consolidation, I'm doing as much for simplicity as I am for keeping the budget under control. And once a tool gets embedded, it's a lot harder to remove And so it's a lot easier to kind of find these opportunities at the onset and combine them or overlap them with something related.
I love how you highlight that importance of sitting at the nexus of what's happening across the organization, because I think Office of CFO and the Office of CIO have that in common in so many ways, and that we see so many things and can connect those dots that it may seem obvious, but others don't maybe realize that we're about to duplicate things or create something that's not actually going to be scalable the bigger the organization gets. And so
absolutely,
it's a critical point that you make there. Johan, thank you so very much for joining us today. Great insights that you've shared. Now, whenever we have a guest on, we do have 2 rapid fire questions that we'd like to ask. So are you ready?
All right, I'm ready.
All right. So first off is, what is the best piece of business or leadership advice that you've ever received?
Delegate. Hands down. This was the hardest thing for me to learn, especially as a new manager where I'm trying to become a manager. That means I'm responsible for everything. So I'm going to try to do everything. And early in my career, I had one manager who was just really influential in my career. And he said, you really need to delegate more things. And it had never even occurred to me like, oh, that's actually what all leaders end up doing. It doesn't mean everything, but it does mean you don't have to be personally responsible for everything. So to me, that learning to delegate is the most important thing that I've ever learned in my career.
It's so hard to do, right? So yeah, it's a really good one. And the second question is, what is something that you do in your personal life that helps you to be your best self in your work life?
If you'd asked me 15 years ago, it would have been Aikido, which is a martial art that I've practiced for a long time. These days, it's yoga. I try to do yoga as much as possible. I think that just exercise is the key to sanity in life. Don't have to go out and run a marathon. And at the very least, I always encourage everyone on my team, like, if you should, I'm probably being a little too prescriptive with them here, but, you really need to do some form of exercise every single day. We all spend way too much time sitting and not moving our bodies. And, any way you can find to do it, you should do it. So I think that's, the key to longevity, or at least mental flexibility.
Johan, you've given us so many great pieces of advice today. If you had to boil that down to just 2 points that you want to make sure the audience remembers from today, what would that be?
It would be collaboration and understanding your stakeholders. Collaboration is an active process. It's not always easy, and it requires a lot of back and forth. And understanding your stakeholders is incumbent on any IT organization to really understand the different parts of the business and where they may be similar and where they may be different. But I think without these 2 things, no one will make it in the modern world of IT, which is always changing and always evolving.
What a fantastic way to close. Well, that does it for today's episode of the CFO Show. And if you'd like more information, please follow the links in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts, because you don't want to miss an episode. For the CFO Show, I'm Melissa Howatson. Until next time.